My mother moved in her abusive boyfriend into our house only for him to abuse me, and she did nothing about it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. All of this happened over 10 years ago. When I was 16, my mother met the devil in the form of a personal trainer. My mom and dad at the time had gotten a divorce. My dad started dating somebody else, and my mom started dating her personal trainer. Now, the extent of her obsession with this man was disgusting. She would do anything to impress him. She would even try to pay for his bills. She got him a bunch of clients for his gym. She would buy him gifts every single week. She was completely and utterly obsessed. From the moment I met him, I knew there was something wrong with him. He would tell my mom that I needed to be disciplined. He also judged the way that I dressed. He would judge my friends, so I started defending myself. I would talk back to him, but this just made him even angrier. Let me just give you some context. I was a straight A student. I was captain of my soccer team, and my mom and I had never had any issues before that. So he kept brainwashing my mom into believing that I was just a bad kid. And for some reason, my mom started agreeing with him. 2 months later, he convinced my mom that he should move in with us. That's when the abuse started. He gave us rules. If I broke them, I had to run for an hour. Part 2 is my mother moved in her abusive boyfriend into our house only for him to abuse me, and she would do nothing about it. Disclaimer, is not my story time. So he made a set of rules. He typed them out, printed them, and put them on the fridge. And if I broke any of these rules, I had to run on the treadmill for an hour. Like I said, my mom and I had never had any issues before him. We were more like best friends, and she believed me. At this point, he had completely brainwashed her into believing that I was just a rebel and that I needed to be disciplined. One of his rules was that I couldn't eat past 10 p.m. He would lock the fridge so that I couldn't get in. I would come home so late from school because I was in so many clubs and sports. By the time I came home, he would force me to do my homework. After that, I had about half an hour to stuff my face with anything I could find. He even told my mom not to make me dinner because I needed to become self-sufficient. I lost about 10 pounds within a month. I was playing soccer every single day. When I would get to school, I would try to eat as much as I could. One day I broke the lock on the fridge, and he threw me so hard into a wall I got a concussion. He told my mom that I did it. Part 3 is my mom's boyfriend would abuse me and she would do nothing about it. Disclaimer, is not my story time. After he threw me into the wall and gave me a concussion, he told my mom that I was the one trying to fight him. That all he did was try to push me off and I hit the wall. My mom believed him. He would find any reason to grab me by the arm and shake me. He would hide my backpack and my shoes so that I would be late to school. And anytime my friends came over, he would bully us. Eventually it escalated to slapping me every time I talked back. My mom would see it and not do anything. When I complained to her, she would cry but not do anything. I asked her to kick him out and she didn't. She told me that she was afraid of being by herself. I was not going to wait for the next time. I grabbed my backpack and ran to my dad's house. And when I told my dad what was happening, he took me to the police and we made a report. When the police showed up to my mom's house, she came to her senses and realized what was happening. She kicked him out and I didn't speak to her for 3 years. I ended up getting back with him, but then they broke up again. I'm now into real estate and I own several properties. My dad and I see each other every single day. I barely speak to my mom. I recently found out she got back together with him. How do I break them up? Give me ideas.
Okay, so who was going to tell me that the actual story behind The Little Mermaid is a literal horror movie and not at all about a cute little mermaid that finds love? The actual story is so freaking dark, dude, that I'm terrified. Okay, just a quick little recap for those of you who have been living under a rock. The Little Mermaid is about a 16-year-old princess slash mermaid who's been living her life under the sea under her dad's rule, but has always had curiosity about land above the water. Well, one night she saves a prince named Eric from drowning and she falls in love. And now that she knows that there's a man with dimples waiting for her, she tries everything in her power in order to get to him. She has a falling out with her dad, which basically leads her right into the hand of a sea witch by the name of Ursula and makes a deal exchanging her voice for legs. But she also has 3 days to receive a kiss. If she receives a kiss during one of these 3 days, she gets to stay a human forever. If she does not, she turns into a shrimp and she will forever belong to Ursula. And even though she goes on land without a voice in the movie, she's kind of killing it. Like she's about to get this kiss. Ursula's not about to have this, so she decides to play dirty, disguise herself as the human that saved Eric and winning his heart, all while using Ariel's voice. So Ariel comes in just in time before the wedding, giving Ursula a little bit of a taste of her own medicine, breaking the curse. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too late. A whole battle ensues. They end up winning, and Eric and Ariel get to live their life married. But what if I told you this is not what went down? So the original story actually dropped in 1837 by Hans Christian Andersen, and the story originally begins with Ariel being 10 years old. Not 16, 10. You're introduced to the king, him being a widower, the 6 beautiful sisters, and the youngest one being the protagonist, Ariel. The reason that she's so obsessed with the world above is because during that time, there's a rule that mermaids cannot even put their head above water until they're 15 years old. So instead of getting her information from Sebastian or Aquafina, she ends up getting all the tea about the land above from her sisters and her grandmother. How do her sisters know so much about the land above, you might ask? Her sisters are older, they're actually able to stick their head above water, but her sisters are not like the mermaids that you see in the movie. No, they are more like sirens, luring sailors to their death. They would actually go out whenever there were stormy nights and they knew that a shipwreck was going to occur, and they would sing to these sailors as they were drowning. We gotta talk about how dark the actual story behind The Little Mermaid actually is. But her sisters are not like the mermaids that you see in the movie. No, they are more like sirens, luring sailors to their death. So it honestly makes sense at the beginning of the movie whenever they're trying to like spear a mermaid on why they would be doing that. And after these shipwrecks, it wasn't Ariel who would try to collect things from this, it was actually her sister. But Ariel did have one thing, and it was the marble carving of a prince. And it was set in a beautiful garden of red flowers that were said to look like the sun. And in the book, it's described as the only thing that Ariel cares about. Well, seeing Eric for the first time is actually pretty similar to the movie. There's a ship, there's fireworks, he's celebrating his birthday. Storm comes, and thankfully Ariel is there to save him. Well, after this, she ends up getting a little bit obsessed with the idea of mortality. So she ends up going to her grandmother and she's like, hey, I just saved this man's life, but if I hadn't, would he have died in the same way that mermaids do? This is whatever her grandmother tells her. I think one of the most morbid things I've ever heard. Grandmother tells her that humans don't die in the same way that mermaids do. Whenever a human dies, they actually have souls and they're able to ascend into heaven. But whenever a mermaid dies, they don't have a soul. They can live to be 300 years old, but after they pass away, they just transform into sea foam. Essentially, they just cease to exist. However, there's a catch, and if a mermaid can get a human to fall in love with her, she is able to actually have a soul. So Ariel's motive is not just about a man. Like, this is some serious stuff. Ariel goes to visit the local sea witch, and as she approaches, she notices that her cave is made out of the bones of humans. So I feel like you already know that this is a bad idea. Like a little bit of a tidbit. Instead of Flotsam and Jetsam, Ursula actually has these little sea worms who she calls chicken in the actual story. The agreement that she makes in the story is so much worse than the movie. In order for her to have legs of a human, it's going to feel like a sword slitting down her tail. Every single time she takes a step, it feels like her feet are bleeding. An even worse caveat is that if she isn't able to do this, she will never turn back into a mermaid. In fact, she will just die. The sea foam situation will just be expedited. And oh yeah, she takes her voice too by cutting off her tongue. And you can actually see this part referenced in the cartoon where Ursula actually takes a tongue and puts it in the potion. This is the part that I just really freaking hate. So she shows up on shore, she's naked, the prince finds her. Because she's unable to talk, he has to help her out a lot. And he kind of starts to view her as more of like a pet. Because he has to take care of her so much and baby her so much, he just isn't able to develop those deeper feelings for her. He even has her sleep outside of his door on this big velvet cushion. All while this is going on, he's taking her horseback riding, taking her mountain climbing, and she is falling deeper and deeper in love with this man. He does develop love for her, but it's more platonic. Whenever Ariel's worst fears come true, and no, it's not Vanessa. He ends up falling madly in love with another woman who he does mistake as being the girl who saved him. Her last day on Earth is rough, man. He requests that Ariel participates in his wedding, and while she does so, she dances, and every single step she takes feels like knives in her foot. At the very end of all the wedding festivities, she goes to the edge of the boat to kind of just reflect on her life, prepare for her last moments, when she's approached by her sisters who have an idea to save her. They exchange some of their hair for a knife from the sea witch, and if she stabs the prince and lets the blood trickle on her feet, she'll be saved and be able to be a mermaid again. But Ariel is too in love with Prince Eric at this point, so she's like, absolutely not. I'm just gonna sacrifice myself. But instead, she makes the decision to throw the knife overboard and just jump right on in the ocean. Okay, this part gets a little bit weird. So she fully expects to dissolve into sea foam, but she doesn't. So this is the last part to the dark story behind the Little Mermaid. But here's where it gets a little bit weird. Instead of turning into sea foam, she's actually visited by these ethereal beings that are kind of like angels. Because Ariel had saved Prince Eric from the ship and actually chose to save him again whenever she threw away the knife, they deemed her as having done really good deeds and decided to go ahead and bestow upon her a soul. Like, nobody can see her, nobody even knows where she went, and she just invisibly says goodbye to both Prince Eric and his new wife. Like, how horrible. To make it even worse, apparently the Little Mermaid was a love letter that Hans Christian Andersen wrote for a guy that he was in love with at the time. Of course, he felt like he couldn't be part of his world because they were very much living in a heterosexual world. Whenever Hans was rejected by this man, The Little Mermaid was written within the same year. So whenever you realize this, it puts a whole other darker spin on top of the darker spin that already existed. Happy Pride.
Am I wrong for wanting to move in my parents and not my husband and suggesting putting them in a nursing home? I, 35 female, have owned our home since before marriage and we have a prenup. In day-to-day life, we refer to it as our home, but my husband, 37 male, has never paid anything towards it and has no legal rights. All of our parents are still alive, but my husband and I both were the youngest children and our parents are all much older. His mom has some dementia and his dad has major mobility issues, so they can no longer stay in their home. And due to mother-in-law wandering the street recently, adult social services has been involved. My husband has 2 siblings and one is an addict and one is in prison, and the other one has 4 kids and lives in a 2-bedroom apartment. So it's basically us or a nursing home. Both of my parents, though, are older and have recently retired. They live in a major city but can't afford to live there on retirement and need to move. I want to move my parents in with us. They're both very easygoing and my husband gets along with them well. And they'd also contribute. Am I wrong for wanting to move in my parents and not my husband's and suggesting putting them in a nursing home? My parents wouldn't be a burden on us at all. My husband's parents just live off Social Security and are going into debt because of their medical costs. So they would be a major burden on us because we'd have to take care of them full time. And because my husband works much longer hours than I do, I'd be responsible. And it's worth it to note that my in-laws aren't very appreciative people and I don't like them. So I mentioned that I want to move my parents in with us and we could even use the money we'd save from their financial help to put his parents in a decent home. But he was furious and he thinks we should take his parents in and my parents can move somewhere cheaper and manage their own retirement funds fine. I expressed that he doesn't have time to look after their medical needs, nor can he afford in-home health care. He told me that out of love for him, I should look after his parents, but I told him under no circumstances will they be moving in. But he's more than welcome to move out and care for them elsewhere.